Hello and welcome to Survival Sweden. Here we are in the beautiful Swedish forest, and I've got my little small holding here, and it's not quite a farm, but it's a big old garden, and I do intend to start ploughing and things, and I've got all kinds of projects going on, so I do need my tractor. I use it all the time, and I tow boats with it and all the rest, and you can get around all kinds of laws about towing things with a tractor, so I thought I would give a bit of information about it actually. So this old beastie that I've got here, this is a Fordson Super Major, and before this I had a Fordson Major, and these are very old tractors. This one's from 1966 from memory, but they're strong, you know, they're really strong. People make tractor pulling tractors out of these. They put in big engines, you know, 2,000 horsepower I've heard, and that's with a standard back axle and gearbox from there. Or certainly the back axle, and I think the gearbox too from this tractor. You know, they're over-engineered, strong old things. And this thing, she starts very, very easily, and she's great fun to drive. You know, chugs along and you're high up, and it's brilliant on the country roads. Really enjoyable. Anyway, so there are a number of videos on YouTube about buying your first tractor, but they all seem to be American, and of course the market and our needs and what's available is a bit different here in Europe. So I thought I'd go through generally how to drive a tractor, you know, the differences between some of the commonly available models, the prices, what you can expect, and how they work in general, and hope it's of interest to some people. Anyway, so I thought, well, first of all, you know, show you around the outside and you can get an idea of what she's like. And the big difference between the Fordson Super Major and its predecessor, the Fordson Major, is that this one has a differential lock. Now, most people probably know what that is from their cars. It means that when you go around a corner, of course, the radius, the distance travelled around a corner, is greater for the wheel on the outside of the corner than from the one on the inside, which means that your car would skid about if you didn't have a differential axle. It's a very clever piece of engineering and a way of making gears, which means that your power can still come to both wheels driven by the engine, and at the same time the difference between the radii doesn't matter. You both wheels remain firmly in contact with the road and not jumping about. So what's important, sometimes if you're in very slippy conditions, you will notice, like when someone gets a car stuck in the mud, that one wheel will spin as somebody tries to drive away, and the other one is it's stationary, it doesn't move at all. And you think, well, why is that? That's the differential axle, and one of the effects it has is if one tire just moves too freely and the other one stands still. So to get around that, if you're going to go through really slippy conditions, what you need is a differential lock, and it locks that differential just for the time you're going to use it to get out of the mud, really, because otherwise it's more wear and tear on the tire, it's more uncomfortable to drive, it's bouncy, there's actually a slight risk involved. And there are high-tech modern solutions in cars where you can have your four-wheel drive on all the time, and it partially engages a differential lock and all the rest. But you know, the old systems were pretty simple, and the way you tell if your tractor's got one normally, when you look in here, you can see there's a pedal, an extra pedal on the floor. Now your boot is going to go here. This is where your heel will be, and here are your brakes, and here you've got this extra pedal which you can press with your heel, and that locks the back axles, and that means you can go through all kinds of mud and slime and it will just pull. It's incredible. The difference is just amazing, which is why I moved up from the Major to a Super Major. So then we come to steering these things and controlling them, and you see you've got on a tractor you've got a double pedal, and this is on all of them, you know. You've got a pedal which, this one on the left, it brakes the left hand back wheel, the one on the right brakes the right hand back wheel, and you've got normal driving, you've got this locking pin here, and it stays down, but you can drive without it, such that you can lock the left wheel, and when you turn the wheel hard over, you can spin the tractor around on a tuppence. And the idea is that you can maneuver a tractor in incredibly tight spaces, especially if you've got machinery behind it, or if you're on a narrow field and all the rest. And the way to drive a tractor is actually quite different to driving a car. Like this is industrial equipment, you know. It's not built for comfort, it's built to be solid, it's built to be simple, and it's over engineered and it's built to last, you know. And this is the handbrake here. It looks very similar to a car handbrake, but it's not really that similar, because if you leave a car handbrake on, you know, your car's going to take off and it's just a bit of an annoyance, and you get a warning sound or your little flashing light, and it doesn't really do any damage. But you know, you leave this fairly tightly on or on at all, and it's really going to potentially do damage to the tractor, because this brake is designed to brake, you know, industrial quality. So the very first thing to do when you're getting your tractor and you've started her up and you're going to move off, every time make sure your handbrake is off. Right, so let's get to the gears, because again, this is different from cars, because you've got, on most tractors, you'll probably have a 4-gear box. On modern tractors you've got sort of 6, 8, 10, God knows, but on these old ones you've normally got 4, which means 4 forward gears and a reverse. On the Fordson range, for some reason, they chose to have 3 forward gears and a reverse. So it's driven like as you would with a car. You've got your normal shifting gear stick, but you've also got that other lever on the right, which is high and low, which is a high ratio and a low ratio. So you can drive along a road in your higher ratio. It's designed for driving more quickly. If you need to pull something very heavy, or you need to go very slowly, or you're handling awkward machinery, you can go into the low range of gears. And just as in with a car, you just press the clutch down and move from the high or to the low ratio, and they do overlap a lot. So the highest gear in the low ratio is rather higher than the lowest gear in the high ratio. So you can play around to find what seems comfortable for whatever job you're doing with the tractor. And you might think that if you're going as slowly as a tractor does, it doesn't make much difference, but it really does. I mean, I actually find that the 3 gears is a bit too little. I would much rather have 4, maybe even 5. When you're pulling very heavy loads or using machinery, it makes quite a difference. And you don't drive a tractor in the same way that you'd drive a car, because in a car you can use the clutch, you know, it's not that heavy, and you can play with the clutch and you can use it to maneuver, hill starts, all the rest. In a tractor, the idea is to get the clutch up as quick as possible, otherwise you're going to burn it out, because you've got so much torque going through that rear axle and driving the thing. So that's a very big difference. If you drive along using the clutch as you would in a car, you'll burn your clutch out quickly in a tractor. Now to change the clutch, you have to split the whole thing in half, literally. So here's the engine, obviously here's the engine, here's the injector pump, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the diesel injector pipes. It's a 4-cylinder engine, so one goes to each of the injectors in the engine there. And here's the bell housing for the clutch. So you can see, to get into there you have to literally split the whole tractor in half. You put a massive jack that's on wheels, usually here, a special type, and you can wheel this bit away from the rest of the tractor. But it's complex doing a clutch in these, and it's very, very heavy work. It's not something you want to get into. So, you know, learning to drive these things with a different technique to a car is important. Here, while we're here, we've got a little pre-filter here. This is a fuel filter which somebody's put in, and it's quite good because it's transparent. You can see if there's crud or muck in your fuel, and often when you buy an old tractor you will find there's a lot of muck in the tanks, and it's often a good idea to remove the tank and flush it out completely. I was lucky when I got this one. There's no muck in there at all. The actual fuel filter is this unit here, the original one. And when it comes to oil too, there's an interesting difference between cars and tractors. You've got a fairly high pressure oil, as you would in many engines, but down here you've got an oil filter. Now in many tractors, if not most, you've got a centrifugal oil filter, and with a very clever piece of engineering, it uses the engine oil pressure to spin the oil at a very high speed in a special shape, a special chamber, and that sorts out the crud from the oil, so your oil can last a long time. And it's a very clever piece of engineering, I must say, and it's worth looking into if you haven't heard of those things before. Now these old injector pumps, this old Sims here, it's a very old and simple thing, and a lot of parts you can actually play around with fairly easily without going to a specialist, surprisingly. And there are videos on YouTube of people who show how to do it, you know, who know miles more than I ever will. And here you've got a lift pump, so you've got a little fuel tap down there under the tank, which is in the cab, and your fuel travels along here through the filter and it comes into this little lift pump, and that's powered by the engine. Very often it's got a little push rod in there which pushes a diaphragm backwards and forwards, which brings the fuel under pressure into the fuel filter and then into the pump itself. But here you've got a little handle on the side. This is for priming it. If you've ever run out of fuel or you've got air in the system, then you can disconnect something somewhere up here at the top of the filter, usually a little bleed screw, and you can pump the fuel through by hand until all of the air is bled out. And once the air is out, then you tighten up your little bleed screw and you know there's not much air in the system. There may come a little air from any bubbles that have been in there through to the injectors, but in most tractors they're self-bleeding. You can help the air to come out by cracking open any one of these 4 nuts just a little bit, and then you'll see as the engine tries to turn over and tries to start, you'll just see a little bit of air coming out, and then finally you'll see just diesel, and then you can tighten it up. And you can do it on all 4 cylinders if you're pedantic, but you seldom need to do it at all. Maybe if it's very cold and you're having trouble cranking, you might do 1 just to help it start, and it'll bleed itself of air anyway. Coolant in these things, same as in a car. I've got my filler somewhere under this hood. There she is. You put your coolant in there. It's just ethyl glycol, the old blue coolant, and water. And yeah, it's all very simple. The first thing that goes wrong on most old tractors, by the way, is things like this, these hot water pipes or oil pipes, and these are deadly cheap. You can buy parts for these old tractors very easily still for all makes, and this, for example, would cost around €12. It's about sort of £10. What else can I show you about the beast? How simple are they? Here's one thing to look out for if you're buying a tractor. These connectors here, there's a spline that you can't see here normally around this peg sticking up, and this top piece pops onto it and you bolt it tight on the splines, but they do wear out on some tractors, and once they go, they're hell. People weld them and they try to fix them, and it just doesn't really work. Someone's going to say, oh, I've done it for years, but they don't. I've seen many people try, and it's one of those things where you have to end up replacing part of the axle then, and this piece, which is the drive. This is the steering bar, the steering rod. So that's something to look out for if you're buying one of these old beasties. And you can see the other side of the steering rod here, which is linked to this linkage, all very simple, which goes up to the cab, which goes into the steering box, which is linked to the steering wheel, and that's how you steer it. Here you've got the alternator. Everything's visible on the tractor normally, very easy to work on for most purposes. Apart from the clutch, most things are really easy to work on. You can see immediately if something's dripping out, going wrong. We come to on these old Majors, there's something interesting. It's a bit quaint. Look, it's got the old windy start there. You've got a big winding handle you can put on there, and you push it in and you rev it up, and there's a little valve which is a cylinder pressure release valve, which is this fellow here. You lift this up and then you turn the flywheel, you make the engine turn faster and faster and faster with the handle, and then you throw this down. Suddenly you've got compression in the cylinders and she starts up in your dreams. You can hope for a start. Anyway, so because we live in Sweden and we've got a very cold climate, it can be minus 30 here in the winter, and of course you often want your tractor at that point. Cars go off the road, something needs moving about, or you want to plough the yard, plough the snow. So we have these heaters here. This is one type of block heater, so it heats the water, the coolant which is going around the block normally to cool it. So all you've got is a heating element in here, and sometimes they have a little pump, sometimes they don't. This one does, I believe. And then you've got the electrics which go here and they come out here, and this is a standard fitting over here. So you've got a plug that goes in there, and the other end goes into the normal plug socket on your garage wall, and you just leave it on for forever if it's minus 30. It can take a few hours to warm the engine up. But interestingly enough, there's a modern invention to replace these, and you wouldn't think it's very good. It doesn't sound very good, but actually they're brilliant. They're better than these in general. It's a heat pad which is self-adhesive. So what you do is you clean up the sump, which most of them have a flat bottom. This one hasn't here. There's a flat part there, but you know, it could be flatter, couldn't it? But what you do is you clean off all the oil and the gunk, and you make sure it's absolutely clean, and you glue a pad, slap it up onto the bottom of the sump. So here you'd have to get a bit imaginative. You'd have to maybe glue a small one here and a small one on the other side, and then you plug them into the mains electricity, and they're just a heater pad, and they're self-regulating so they don't overheat and so on generally. And what it does is it heats the oil, and of course the oil, this is the lowest part of the engine, where all the oil sinks down to when the engine is not running. And as soon as it does run, you know, a percentage of the oil is going around the engine, and then it's falling back down to here. So by heating that oil, when the oil gets very cold at say -30, unless you put in a very special grade of oil which copes with that deliberately, it goes thick, and it goes so thick you can't imagine. In a normal car, you literally cannot move the gear stick. You physically cannot move it. You break it off before it moves at -30 if you've got a summer oil in there and it gets that cold, because it goes almost solid, and it becomes almost a glue between the metal parts. So by heating this up, you're making everything turn more easily. You're making sure there's immediately better lubrication. But of course, because heat rises, even with something like this, the heat will just rise up from the oil and pervade the engine. And it's just often a lot of more simple than connecting one of these up, because these, you know, you can so easily knock one of these or get a water leak and not notice it and lose coolant. It's just one less thing to go wrong. So those heat pads are actually very, very good. I didn't believe in them till I saw them working. Fantastic. This little fellow here, this is the air intake. Air comes in here, goes into this filter housing down here. I can't open this cover just now because the exhaust's on. You have to take it off and take this off in bits and pieces. I can't do that one-handed, sorry. But it's a very simple system. You know, you just got a piece of sponge normally soaked in oil, so you can easily take it out and you give it a good old wash with whatever detergent, and then you let it dry out completely, then you soak it in new oil and you put it back, and then that's it. Voila, there's your air filter, and they're very good too. The oil makes all the dirt stick so it doesn't go into your engine. The simplicity of tractors, you know, is lovely. Look at this old pipe. You can just lift it out. It hasn't even got a bracket, you know, that's simple. And most of them are like this. And one of the first things you do is when you get an old tractor, you know, you buy one of these because they're often missing, and that means all the rainwater's going straight down here, not quite into your engine, but it's filling up this bit here. And if it fills up enough, yeah, it could go into your engine. Usually what happens is it corrodes down here and you end up having to buy new pieces. And okay, that's no big deal, but to unbolt rusty old bolts that have been here for 50-60 years, you know, that's when it gets difficult. And expensive, because you break more and more things trying to unbolt things. Wing mirrors on the tractors, you know, you need them because you've often got a wide load behind your tractor, and you want to see around it. Problem is, the further out it goes, the more it'll vibrate, so you don't see very well through them very often. You've really got to look over your shoulder a lot driving a tractor. Excuse me. The law over here in Sweden says you've got to have a warning triangle somewhere on the back of your tractor, just to show that it's a slow moving vehicle in essence. So every Swedish tractor will have them on the back here somewhere. Quite a simple, safe design, good idea. And it means that generally, you know, you can get away with a lot of things. You've got your warning triangle, people see there's a hazard, and obviously you move a triangle to the back of your trailer if you're pulling a trailer so that people can see it. And in that way, you know, the police know that you're pretty safe and you're not doing something silly, you're very visible. And even should your lights fail, you've got a big reflector at the back and people can see you. When it comes to hydraulics, every tractor has its hydraulic system. And the hydraulics, which run from a little pump that runs off the engine, which you'll never see, tucked away somewhere in the gubbins of this thing. And it runs these hydraulic arms, and you'll find them on the back of every tractor. And these arms, of course, are for using farm equipment. And so you need to be able to lift up and down the different types of equipment for it to go in the earth and then be out of the earth to drive around on a road, etc., and to adjust the depth. So it really is as simple as those arms lifting up and down. And of course, some older types of equipment especially are not always absolutely balanced or straight, so you've got what's called a balancing box, and this is just a little gear in here, and you can wind this handle and that will lift one arm slightly up or slightly down relative to the other, so it will adjust the angle of your equipment or whatever you need to adjust the angle for. You've got a power takeoff in every tractor and they do come in basically in two different types. There's a really old system which is not used anymore, which has smaller than this, and it goes at a different number of RPM, and it was on the very, very old Ford tractors for one thing. And sometimes they had a modifier box, and I think this is one of them. So probably old PTO power takeoff came out down here at the wrong RPM for most standard equipment as it became standardized in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So you've got this little gearbox here, which then it goes at a different RPM, but there's a standard, I think it's 540 RPM standard all over the world on just about every tractor for your equipment, and that, so it's all going to work on whichever tractor you put it onto. You've got this is the operating lever here. By pulling this up or down, you can switch the power takeoff on or off. So in other words, this gear stops turning and your equipment stops doing whatever it's supposed to do that you're towing by using this lever. And for safety, you've got to know that you can switch it off at any point from the cab. And further to the hydraulics, now I didn't know anything about hydraulics when I bought my tractor, but most of them, not all, will have an output for hydraulics, and there are two types. And one of them basically is where, let's say you've got a piece of equipment like a piston, and all you want, and it's got a spring to return or there's a heavy weight on it, so you push it out by having hydraulic oil pushed out of here, and when you switch off your hydraulic pressure with a lever, then the piston or whatever equipment it is goes down or in or back, and the oil just goes back into the system, and it's oil tight, it doesn't leak. This is what these special couplings are for. They're speed couplings. Just clip your new piece in, whatever pipe it is, and then you can unclip it like that. And then you have the other type, which is a feed and return system. So your feed will come out of one of these. I think from this one, this is the feed, if I remember right. So the oil will come out of here, it will go round whatever machinery it's going into, and then it will feed back into the tractor through the other one. And that's your circular flow system, and that means you can have things like hydraulic motors, because you can imagine this pushes around a pump, or the opposite of a pump, a little propeller which drives something like a motor, which makes your equipment go round, and then the oil, which is then at low pressure after doing its work, comes back and into the gearbox. It just drops back into this huge casing here, which is just full of oil. You've got your ploughing lights on most tractors there, so you can see behind, when you've got a big piece of machinery there. It's not just a reversing light, you need some good lights at the back really, and you need good lights at the front. This one has some extra lights somebody's added, which is pretty good, because the original ones were a little bit on the small side there. And let's talk about what equipment you can have behind these things. Well, in the very early tractors, you had a 20, approximately, it was in inches very often, but approximately 20 millimeter system, so that, for example, these holes here would be to take a bar which is of a diameter of 20 millimeters. This might have been 20 millimeters, and everything else. And then we came to a slightly more modern standard in whatever it was, the 50s or something, and it was 1 inch, so that's 25 millimeters. This one's a 1 inch. You can see that bar, that's 1 inch across. So everything here, that's 1 inch across. The hole's designed to take a 1 inch pin. This pin is called a lynch pin, and you lock it on with a simple locking mechanism like this. This bar up here, this is for the top of your equipment, so when this moves or doesn't move, this is fixed, and when your lifting arms move relative to it, of course you're going to get a different angle on the equipment at the back. It's going to move like this, and it can tilt. So yeah, you can adjust this, finally adjust this by hand when you put on your equipment by twisting it. It's got a thread at one end and a thread at the other, so by turning this around you make this bar shorter or longer, and it's all quick and easy. So anyway, there's a lot more I could rant about tractors about, but that's the bones of it. When you come to buy an old tractor, you know, you're going to find a lot of things will be worn out. Like, where's a good example? There are things worn on here. Look at this. That's a bit sloppy, isn't it? You know, it's been bodged together, and they put an old piece of pipe in there because they didn't have the right length of bolt and whatever. But it doesn't really matter, you know, unless you want to make a perfect restoration for a museum, or, you know, to show off. You know, for working use, doesn't matter if it's been a bit battered and torn about and things have been replaced over the years. Most farmers know what they're doing and they make it perfectly functional. One fault I found on this tractor was this linkage here, which controls the distance out that the arms at the back are from one another for different pieces of equipment. And as you drove along, this would vibrate around and it would come loose and it would fall onto the road. I lost it once or twice. And all I had to do was I welded on some weights, some old bits of metal here, so it doesn't spin with vibrations. I've done the same on both sides, and you can easily modify old tractors like that. You know, it's chunky metal. Welding is easy because it's heavy metal. This bar I made myself, and this is so that I can reverse up to a trailer, and I can use the lift arms to lift the trailer up like this so that the tow hook is in the right place, and reverse that little bit and put my pin in to be able to pull it. On modern tractors, the more modern standard, as I say, this went from 20mm to 25mm. The new ones are 32, and you can usually lock the towing apparatus from the cab. There's a bar that sticks down and you reach back and you can just lock it up and down, or it's even hydraulic sometimes. On these old ones, you got to jump out, take out the linchpin, reverse onto your trailer, jump out again, put the linch pin in, put the lock pin in, and then you're away. So, you know, for modern farmers, things are that much more convenient, but the price of tractors is just huge these days. To operate the hydraulics on this old beastie, very simple. You know, there's a lever here. As you pull the lever up, the lift arms come up. As you push this forwards, the lift arms go down, and you've got a little lock nut here so you can adjust it for different pieces of equipment, so you know where a certain position is for a certain lift. And somebody's added, I think, this little box on here. It's probably a factory available edition, and this is for the extra circuit at the back for my extra hydraulics, which were almost certainly not on the tractor from the beginning. So I'm gonna make a few videos about old tractors and bits and pieces and what people need to know. So if you have any questions, do leave them in the comments, because I'm sure I've left lots of info out. But that's a little overview, and I hope that helps some people. And I love my old tractor, and I hope other people get some enjoyment from getting one and playing around with them. The price of these things, I think I paid about £2,500 for this one, although the back tyres were worn out. And I have to say, these cost a lot. There's something I could tell you, isn't it? These here tractor tyres, they cost a lot of money. You're looking around €600 each, sometimes plus the fitting. So if you get a flat tyre, or you cut these on a nail, or you cut them on something else, you're looking at a lot of money, because you'd have to take the wheel off yourself, you'd have to have big jacks, you'd have to carry it on something into the tyre dealer, get it fixed, bring it back, reverse the whole process. It's not like fixing a car tyre, it's a mission. And the pressure in those things is actually pretty low. So the moral is, you know, when you're on a farm, this is why farmers are very careful about people not dropping bits of metal and things like that around the fields, because, you know, you run over a nail on one of these and it's going to cost you a load of money.